Oh, yeah,
that I have done. You guys all look so like it. You're all messed up to, what do you say, take the box office? Anyway, this is actually, panel's actually a lot. It's only standing at 99, 712. Stan Wood turns 100, coming December 28th. And what we're celebrating now, we're events. So I am Dan Klinger. I work with Stan at Marvel and other places. And moderated a lot of panels with conventions. Oh,
can't hear you.
and okay, okay.
There you go.
There we go. I understand, these people all understand, we all work with them. I was the person who wrote his biography, Marvel's Life, he made the story. Stan Lee, interviewed him a lot, but at least everybody here knew and admired him. Stan was more than just a gallery of cameos. I think it's safe to say most of us wouldn't even be here in this convention and this room without Stan, and without Jack, and without Steve, and without a bunch of other people. Will Eisner comes to mind. But what he did with his collaborators really was revolutionary and changed not just comics, but popular culture and a lot else. So, well, we have to practice these panels. Anyway, I have an unbelievable panel. And I'll take a lazy moderator's way out and let them introduce themselves. So, starting at the end.
Oh, that's me. Okay. That's me. I was busy photographing this beautiful audience.
John Semper, right?
Hi, I'm John Semper. I was the producer and head writer for Spider-Man the Animated Series on Fox. Thank you. I now officially love you all. And I got to work with Stan personally, but you know all about that. Next, my friend here, Eric Lewald.
Eric Lewald.
Thank you, John. Cousins here at Fox Kids TV. I was in charge of the 90s X-Men, the writing of the 90s X-Men series. I met Stan the first day of work, and it just went uphill, downhill from there. But the gentleman, you're right, you're getting all the people from the 90s here that put Stan on television. Larry here to the right was in charge of the art on the show.
Larry Houston.
Hi, my name is Larry Houston, and I work with Eric. I was the producer director on the X-Men series and Fantastic Four and G.I. Joe. And Eric and I also worked on
RoboCop Alpha Commando.
I worked with Stan back in '81 when he just started his Marvel production show. And so I got a chance to actually meet my idol and work with him for almost 11 years.
And for Larry in New York, your name would be pronounced the correct way, which is Houston, of course.
I didn't, sorry.
I said New York City, your name would be pronounced the correct way, which is Houston.
Oh.
It's an inside New York joke, I'm in the wrong state. Dennis Kitchen.
Just so you know, your voice is kind of muffled with
It
it.
is. Okay.
I'm from the underground comics branch of the comic book industry. And Stan and I became unlikely pen pals starting in 1969 when I sent him my first self-published comic. And he kept offering me a job for one reason or another, and I kept turning him down until my company was on the brink, and I said, sure. And so I worked for Stan for about 1 full year.
Thank you, Maggie.
I
Maggie Thompson?
I describe myself as celebrity adjacent, award-winning pop culture nerd, and that sort of sums up my life. My late husband Don and I did the first comic art fanzine titled, by the way, Comic Art, and we sent it to people like Stan, who are kind enough to indulge fans as fans and realize, I don't know what he realized, but what we realized was, hey, this is a guy we can reach out to and communicate with. He was wonderful in every way. However, footnote, the first major comics convention was a multi-day event in New York City. And there were 4 women and entire attending and participating. Lee Hoffman was a Western writer, Pat Lupoff, who was Dick Lupoff's wife, and Phil Steinberg from Marvel, because Stan couldn't come because he wasn't busy. And we asked to visit the offices, and we all entered the Gold Key offices, we went to the DC offices, we couldn't go to the Marvel offices because Stan was busy. And some people would use that as an excuse, but my Lord, look what he turned out, and compared to the work of any other comic book editor at that time. Stan was phenomenal, which is why he invented the Marvel method, because he wanted to bring more comic books to more people.
Thank you, Maggie. Michael Kelly.
I'm Mike Kelly. I had the privilege and pleasure to work with Stan Lee from 1994 to 2018. So I got to be his executive assistant and the editor on the Amazing Spider-Man newspaper strip. And it was a pleasure, a privilege, as I said, and he's a great guy to work for.
Thank you, Mike. And Brian Michael Bendis, who is...
I haven't left the house in 3 years, so that's right. Yeah, I'm Brian Bendis. I worked at Marvel for almost 20 years, and in that time I had many fantastic and surreal interactions with Stan, all of which were better than I would have ever hoped. So I was grateful to be invited to come here and share it.
Well, thank you for coming. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to do a quick Stanley 101 on the off chance that you don't know why you showed up in this room. And then I will turn over images and conversation starters like these guys leave them for each of the panelists. So, this is where a lot of us of a certain generation first got to know Stan. Was in the inside front cover of Fantasy Masterpieces, where he had a few things to say, but that's the image many people have for years and years and years. The guy on the stool with the Frank Sinatra hat, manhandling that issue of the Fantastic Four that is probably decreased its value greatly. That was who we knew as Stan Lee. This is Stan and his parents in Washington Heights in probably about 1932, because that's Stan on the left, his father Jack, Larry Lieber, the co-creator of Thor, Iron Man, Ant-Man, and so on, is the little baby, and Celia Lieber is Stan and Larry's mother. This is Stan's high school yearbook picture, in which he announced that his aim was to get to the top and stay there. As opposed to Bob Dylan, who said that his aim was to play with Little Richard. Stan did not say anything about Little Richard. Thank you. In his yearbook. Martin Goodman, Stan and Larry's cousin, who was the publisher at a company called Timely Comics, which had been a pulp magazine publisher, hired Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who were his editor and art director, created Captain America for him, and that's Joe and Jack around that period. And the first thing that Martin had a cousin named Stanley Lieber, who needed a job, and Stan came on as Simon Kirby's assistant. And this is his first byline, was a text story in Captain America #3. And it was the first time Stanley Martin Lieber used the name Stan Lee, because it was a silly name. It took his first name, broke it in two, and it was a ridiculous name that only a 17-year-old kid would come up with. But he kind of was stuck with it. So Stan was involved with co-creating a lot of characters, worked in many, many genres. The Destroyer was just one of them. Another one was Sneaky Pig and Silly Seal. These are characters he worked on with Al Jaffe of Mad Max where he did promotional and propaganda work and morale building work. His most famous, of course, being the immortal slogan, VD, not me. After the Army stand came back to Conley, and there he is smoking a pipe, which I don't even realize he actually did on the cover of Writer's Digest, telling you there's money in comics. This is Stan, having lost a bit of hair in the mid-50s with the, everybody thinks that Marvel was always this little engine that could, but at one point, Timely, Atlas, Marvel, putting out like 80 titles a month. They were the most prolific company out there. Stan was the editor in charge of it all. These are some guys from Princeton. And so when Marvel started hitting big, it got the attention of college students. And they're the Twinkle twins. And I did an interview with them on, I think, one of the WonderCon online conventions. You can find it, but this is a panel called Stanley Goes to College, and there's Stanley meeting the guys from Princeton. And then as his fame grew, as Marvel's fame grew, his hair pieces grew, and his beard grew. And this is really the Stan that people knew for years. And of course, there's Stan, for the back a little, before they had hair news with Jack Kirby, with whom he created the Marvel Universe, starting with Fantastic Four, and then Hulk, Avengers, Iron Man. With Steve Ditko, of course, he co-created Spider-Man. These covers drawn by Kirby for Spidey's debut, Spider-Man's 60th anniversary. If you haven't seen the exhibition at the museum, you should go. It's a great exhibition. Amazing Spider-Man 1 this is the first Ditko cover, Spider-Man 2. Together, these three guys created all sorts of stuff, but then somebody named Bendis had Stan one day. Brian, what's the story behind Stan complimenting you so highly in this?
Wow. All right, it's weird to see that on the screen. So when I was in college in Cleveland, at the Cleveland Institute of Art, they were having a Superman parade in celebration of Siegel and Schuster and the connection to Superman, and there was going to be a Superman museum and a Superman statue that this convention and parade were all in concert for. Like we're raising money to turn downtown Cleveland into a celebration of Superman, and I got hired to draw the signs on the cars in the parade, which was the greatest job I had ever gotten. And I got it through school. Like I literally got it off the boardwalk at school, and I couldn't believe it. And I've been drawing like signs for Jonathan Frakes and all the people that were showing up. And at the last minute, either Siegel or Schuster, and I think it was Siegel, was supposed to show up and then couldn't show up for health reasons. And then Stan being Stan, literally that day it said Stan's on a plane, he's going to take Siegel's place because someone of that level should represent Superman. It was really like warm and amazing. I of course got the call, new signs, we need new signs. And I stayed up all night, it's Stan, oh my God, Stan. And then so I stayed up all night drawing the signs for him in his car. And I 7 in the morning, we're in a parking lot at a parade route, getting everyone off the buses, and Stan comes barreling off the bus. He comes up to me and goes, "Ryan Bendis!" And I go, like, I'm so confused, I don't know where I am, and I go, "You know my name?" And he goes, "You're wearing a name tag, schmuck," and slapped me on the back, and he kept moving. And that was the first thing Stan ever said.
Next time, what story behind
Oh yeah, like for over, I mean, it's just, I'm not the only creator that's been through this, and certainly you know all these stories, but like, when you get the job at Marvel, that's exciting. And then you're writing Spider-Man, and that's exciting. And then someone calls you up and goes, "Do you want to hear what Stan thinks of your work?" And that never occurs to you. It's like, do you want Ronald McDonald to tell you how your hamburger tastes? It just sounds like insane that this, really almost fictional character in my head was real and going to talk to me. And then over the years, we had all these amazing interactions, including you know, some of his publishing endeavors where he invited me to be part of them. I couldn't because I was at Marvel, but it was amazing just to be asked. It was like one of the greatest things that ever happened, that he thought that much of me. And so we had, and I had a lot of very warm, intimate, really got to know the man. Like I almost feel ridiculous saying it because you had so many interactions with him. But to meet the man versus the man was really, I'm really glad I got that experience.
And this is some of the reinvention you did with Spider-Man on the other characters twice. Did Stan and Eric comment?
Yeah, first publicly before he said it privately, and it didn't even occur to me, like, we were just going about our day creating Miles, and that he would have an opinion and it would be so warm and loving. And honestly, some of our philosophy in creating the character was fully based on things Stan had said publicly decades before. That Stan had very clearly in many interviews described how part of Spider-Man's popularity was the full costume with no skin showing, that anyone could see themselves in the costume. Like it was that extra leap that anyone could see themselves in it. And then, so we felt empowered by that idea. And then over the course of the time we were making Miles, people came up to me from all over the world and described exactly what Stan was describing in the 70s. Like that had happened to them. So yeah, it's an enormous part of why Miles, because the philosophy is Spider-Man.
Thank you, Brian. Dennis Kitchen.
We're skipping in line.
My PowerPoint is dictating the order of
All right.
I don't want anybody to have a seizure, so I put back and forth with the images. Okay.
So, starting in 1969, when I sent Stan my first comic, I was surprised he sent me a nice letter back, because apparently he often did with fans. And it started an unusual kind of a pen pal thing where I kept changing my letterhead, and he kept laughing at the letterheads, and I think that was really the key. So kids, you want to break into comics, cool letterheads. And he kept offering me a job, and I didn't want to move to New York. I was in Wisconsin, and I had my own little publishing company called Kitchen Sink Press. And I said, Stan, you know, I work for myself. Why do I want to work for the man, even if it's Stan the man? And he kept telling me how great it would be, and I kept saying, nah. And he was very frustrated with me. In the 1973, Underground Comics went through what we call the crash of 73, and suddenly I wondered if I'd even have a company. And so Stan called right about the time I was pretty despondent, and he said, you changed your mind about working for me? And I said, yeah, you know, let's talk. So he flew me to New York, and he said, what's it going to take? And you got to remember, at this time, Stan was becoming a popular culture figure. He was giving college talks, and he was a middle-aged guy, and he saw Underground Comics as kind of the edgy thing that a lot of the college kids were reading, and he wanted to be part of that somehow. He wanted to be hip and with it. So he said, what's it going to take? And I said, well, you know, the guys who work with me, they keep their own copyright. They keep their own art. They own their own trademark. You know, if we were going to work for Marvel, we'd have to have that. And he said, maybe we can do that. And I couldn't believe this country bumpkin from Wisconsin came in there. And keep in mind, Martin Goodman had just retired, and Stan was another publisher, not just the editor. And so he was really green as a publisher. And I was a 4-year veteran of publishing, so I was really smart. And he basically acceded to all of my demands. And the next thing I know, and I said, one last condition. I don't want to move to New York. Let me do it in Wisconsin. You can save that office space. And I guarantee you'll get everything on time and not to worry. And he said, well, all right, if that's what you prefer. So started doing this bi-monthly magazine called Comics Books, spelled with an X. And I had assembled the first issue, and I kept asking him, you know, on the masthead, what was his title? Was he the publisher, editor-in-chief? What was he? And he said, I don't know, let me think about it. So we finally get to the point where this is ready to go to press. In the old days when we literally pasted things up with a waxer. And the only thing missing was his title. And I said, Stan, you got to tell me, what's your title? And he said, well, I thought about it then. He said, put down that I'm the instigator. He said, because he said, I'm so afraid you're going to embarrass me in the company. And he said, if that happens, I can just say, you only instigated it. But if it's a big success, I can say, I instigated it.
Thank you. Maggie. Hi there.
Oh, yes, well,
So this is the cover of Stan's 75th birthday as the Buyer's Guide. That's what we thought.
so
That's when we
it's.
thought 75 was old.
We
What's
said we have to do something, come on. And, yes, and what we usually did was we tell contributors that that was the theme of the issue, and if they wanted to, they would provide various input types of things, cartoons, articles, whatever. And it was absolutely delightful. He was a pleasure to honor, for heaven's sake, and everybody was eager to participate. By the way, footnote should also note that my brother worked at Marvel for a while. And he was Carol Kalish's assistant doing public relations. And so for him, one of his jobs was probably like sometimes, right? Which was to, somebody would want to send something to him, somebody on staff would say, can you use something, or say, who was that, who asked? And Paul would explain who the person was, because if you can imagine all the different things Stan did, you can't imagine, because it was so various. No, an instigator. At one point, he did Secrets Behind the Comics, which you sort of swiftly passed. He did a booklet for anybody who wanted to work in comics and explain what an inker was, what a penciler was, what the letterer did, and so forth and so on. And so, to honor a later event, I did an article in Comics Buyer's Guide in which I paid tribute to the various things that he did. And I said, you understand he did that, what was it? At the point that I was comparing it to DC, he was doing, 13 titles in the same time that another editor, the editor of DC, was doing 3. And I said, but people don't understand what it is that an editor does. An editor doesn't make the policies. An editor doesn't set the cover price. An editor doesn't get to say, I think we should use this paper stock. The editor deals with various things, but he is hired to make the audience the happiest it can be and convey to the audience that this is the best you could possibly get. And that is exactly what he did. And I wrote an article to that effect for Krause Publications, and another editor who worked there said an editor's job is a dirty one. It's like being a thong bikini. You're getting it from both sides and doing the best you can to keep it together.
The cover that's up there is by Marie Severin. Maggie, that's Marie Severin cover up there. The artist by Marie Severin? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, because we had a nice circulation and a supportive publisher who had no clue as to what comics were about, we could reach out to people and get assignments, and that's prior to that. This is a newsletter that we did, Don and I did, and, oh yes, okay. Prior to our doing Comics Buyer's Guide, Krause Publications, long prior to that cover story, we did a newsletter called Newfangles, and it started out to tell comics fans, so-and-so moved, so-and-so had a baby, here's a change of address, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we get this call, somebody says, oh, Stan Lee got fired. Did you know that? And I go, wow, that's news, we have to print that. That's not just fan news, that's industry news. And so we try to figure out, well, how we're going to check on that. And I said, well, one of the ways to check on that is by phone call, long distance call to New York City, to Marvel Comics, and Stan answered the phone. And that kind of took care of that. And so we did how to squash a wild rumor. And he quit Marvel, actually, if you take it back, the audience can read that he, Stanley has quit Marvel, joined Charlton, and is trying to lure Ditko away from DC. And according to the rumor, he was fired for putting all his relatives on payroll. and paying them instead of non-relatives when the budget was short. And so, yeah.
If firing relatives was a firing, hiring relatives was a firing offense, Marvel would have no staff.
So that's the full story there.
Thanks, Maggie.
And then we closed, as you may know, Flo Steinberg has left Marvel pleading overwork. I'm sure she will be missed by the very fans who overworked her into leaving. Because, yes, there was a lot of people at Marvel doing fantastic things.
Thank you. John Semper. Oh, and don't forget, John has brought a top secret sound bite. And I'm not going to put it on now because I will probably totally lose the whole PowerPoint. But at the end, so let's stick around for this never before heard.
Never before heard.
Top secret. John is risking life, limb, and everything else to the show.
Copyright infringement, probably.
Well, this whole PowerPoint. Anyway, John,
Yeah.
tell us about your stand.
Unlike all of these other luminaries here on the panel, I had a unique relationship with Stan. He treated me as if I was his son. His obnoxious teenage rebel son, where every time he looked at me, he felt a great deal of emotional pain and disappointment. And you're all nerds, so you know this feeling. You all have this relationship with your parents, so I'm amongst kindred spirits. Stan and I met roughly around the same time that Larry met Stan. We were all at a company called Marvel Productions, which is where I cut my teeth as a showrunner, working on, the funny thing about Marvel Productions is we did everything but Marvel properties. We did Transformers, and I did a show called Moon Dreamers, and I did a show called Fraggle Rock, and the whole thing. But, thank you. I got to know Stan there. And I had been a huge fan of Marvel in the 1960s. I probably picked up my first Spider-Man comic book around about Spider-Man 2 or 3. And I had paid money. I had paid $16 to hear Stan speak at Harvard. He came to Harvard one night and spoke, and it was one of the finest nights of my life. So getting to be his friend when we were hanging out at Marvel Productions doing everything except Marvel properties was really a thrill for me, and we became very good friends. 10 years later, he was in the middle of doing a show called Spider-Man, the animated series, and they were having a lot of trouble getting it on the air. And I was working on a show called Puzzle Place, which is a show that none of you will remember. One or two. That tells me everything you need to know about Puzzle Place. And he said, we're in trouble. We're running the risk of not getting the show on the air. And I need you to come over here real fast. So I literally fled Puzzle Place, creating lifelong enemies, and came over to Spider-Man. Now the weird thing about that was that even though they were late, and even though they brought me in to save the show, it was like they were just, number one, it was like they were starting from scratch. They had absolutely nothing ready. And number two, it was as if the writer guy was the worst human being on the planet and deserved to be beaten up at every conceivable moment. But somehow we managed to get a show out the door. The interesting thing about Spider-Man that you have to remember is it's the last animated show where all of the original writers or creators involved in Spider-Man were involved as far as the writing side is concerned. So I had Marv Wolfman working on the show at one point. Jerry Conway worked on the pilot. Stan obviously was involved for about the first 13 or maybe the first 20 episodes, and then he bowed out. But it was a real mandate of mine to try to get everyone involved who had been part of the development of this character, this wonderful character. I had a great time working with Stan. He was a real curmudgeon. And a lot of people here will talk about what it was like to work with Stan. If we get a chance to run the clip, I will actually be able to show you what it's like. I'll let you hear what it was like to work with Stan. It was not always pleasant. You'll hear the complete contempt in his voice as he's dealing with me, like, why am I letting him down by writing this show the way that I'm writing? But I think ultimately he was proud of the show. He did come to me at one point and say that they had screened the premiere at some convention that he was attending, and he watched it for the first time there, and he really loved it. He was really proud of it. So despite all the agony he was going through, I mean, it was real agony for him to deal with me because we had different ideas about how to write a show. Everything with Stan was action. Keep the action going. You gotta keep the action going. Never let it flag for a moment. And you know, sometimes when you're writing television, you have to have moments that are a little quieter and moments where you develop the characters. Stan hated that. Absolutely hated that. And so he would beat me up over it. And you're going to hear me being beaten up if we get around to running this club. But the thing that you will hear is also how he put himself dramatically into explaining what he wanted. And it's a really good, it's not so much a great example for me, but it's a really good example of the way that he treated the art of creating and writing. And at the very end of the show, I did put him in it. He did not ask me to do that. I did that because I felt that there needed to be a moment, for those of you who have seen the show, I felt that Spider-Man by the end had grown. And he needed to come to his creator and say, I'm not the same guy you created. And Stan, I think, really enjoyed coming in at that particular moment. And I don't know how many of you know this, but his wife, Joan, whom I had also known for a good long time and whom I really adored, she was the voice of Madam Web in my show. I wrote it specifically for her. So I'm just curious, how many of you were introduced to Spider-Man through Spider-Man the Animated Series? Yeah, there you go, okay. There you go. We were the gateway drug. Eric and I, our shows were the gateway drug. We sucked you in and never let you go.
Speaking of Eric, Eric.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, let's put aside 5 years of creating the X-Men show and the highlights. After, Stan was a real pioneer in producing things for the web. I don't know if any of you know this, but he started a company to do this, and of course, in his mind was, I get to control it all, and I get all the IP rights. But one of the first things that he put on his, Larry, you worked there, but the name of the company, my mind's just like Stanley Media. Okay. So anyway, he creates this place, and he hired Larry and me and Will Video, folks that he'd known from working in television, to create some shows for his new web presence. And the then Stanley's Mighty Seven. He loves numbers. I've got one here. Stanley's the Phantom 5. That was the Super 7 before it became the Mighty 7. So it was great fun with him trying that out. Fortunately, Stan is evidently a very trusting man. Other people can attest to this. And just at its peak, when it looked like Stanley Media was just going to boom and we were all going to get jobs for 5 years, somebody ran off with all his money and it collapsed on him.
Yeah.
So that was a tough time for Stan.
I was working on The Accuser.
Yeah. So running forward to 2019, again, this is kind of a testament to Stan, because he came up with half those characters. That, by the way, that artwork is Larry Houston's artwork here. Larry and Rick. Just when Marvel got all the rights back to the TV show, it said, you understand, there are hundreds of millions of X-Men, the animated show fans out there. We need to write a book about what it was like making it, what it was like doing the art for it, what it was like putting a show together, hand-painted show back in the 90s. And I didn't even realize how hard it was. I was just had my head down writing scripts. I didn't know what all the art people went through. But this book that, by the way, you can just call me and I'll evaluate it for a good price. We did a book that did a history of putting it together. And Larry can tell you, there's something like 600,000-700,000 paintings per episode. People had to hand paint all that beautiful stuff over and over and over again to make it move and to make you feel the the show as well. Makes me feel it's my dear sweet wife Julia, who's there, who's a writer on the show. She's a future man. We spent a couple of years interviewing all the great artists that worked and production people that worked on the show, and with Abrams Publishing came up with that book. It's on, you can get it on Amazon, but it was kind of a labor of love because you're going back and everybody that you're interviewing about it, the artists, the voice talent, saying, oh, this is the best thing I ever did. It was my favorite job ever. It's my favorite job ever. Well, of course, it was all our favorite jobs ever because it was X-Men. Oh, going down throttling back 30 years there?
Yeah, back in the 80s. It's like back in the days when I first started working at Marvel Productions. The first show I worked on was actually the syndicated Spider-Man. They had.
Larry, can you get closer to the mic?
Oh, there was a syndicated Spider-Man when I first got to working at Marvel Productions, and they needed 65 episodes, and they had another 26 to finish out. So Stan Lee hired me to work on syndicated Spider-Man. That's actually where I got my first compliment, because I did a lot of Spider-Man-ish stuff in the storyboards, and he actually thanked me, and I was like, oh my God, Stan, he gave me a compliment. It was great. That's Stan's at the top, and that was a celebration when we finished the Spider-Man's Amazing Friends series. I was working on that with him. And so Firestar, Iceman, and that kind of stuff. And that series was like a lot of fun to draw and storyboard. I didn't have as much interaction as a writer because I actually wrote one episode of Spider-Man Amazing Friends called Swarm. And other than that, I was just another artist.
Swarm was a character made entirely of bees.
Yes. And I got that show, got that script through NBC. They greenlit it. It's like, oh, great. But yeah, that was a fun series to work on. And what I was telling people is that back then, these phones didn't exist, so there was no reason to take pictures unless someone was having a birthday or a celebration year or something like that. So I only had 2 pictures with Stan. I worked with him about 11 years. That's the 2 year scenes, the 2 of them. That's it.
That's a classic Stan pose.
Yeah. And the one thing I can say, that's right. Stan and I worked together along with Rick Holberg and Will Mineo. We tried to do Pride of the X-Men. We tried to get it on the air in the mid-'80s. And we put our best foot forward working with the writer Larry Parr. So we tried to get it out there at that time period, but the blowback that they got was that it was only 3 networks, CBS, NBC, ABC. And when they saw it, they went, what's a mutant? Why are they hating each other? Why do people hate them? It's like they didn't get the series back then. So it didn't go anywhere back then. But the one thing I wanted to relate to everyone, because I was working with Stan for about 11 years at the studio. There's 3 Stan Lees that when he would come to work, because he was actually literally like 2 doors from where I sat down at my desk. There's J. Jonah Jameson, there's Peter Parker, and there's Spider-Man. and I really believe that's how come he could write the newspaper script so well, because it's one of those 3 personalities. And literally, he comes into work, and it's Peter Parker. You can talk to him just like this, no problem at all. If he's Spider-Man, he's on. Click, the click is on. He's out there selling and he's performing and everything. But there are days when he comes to work, he's not in a good mood. And that's the person that I call J. Jonah Jameson. And a lot of us, when we saw J. Jonah Jameson come into the office, we just stayed away for a little bit and wait for that personality to go away and wait for Peter Parker to come back.
Yeah, real quick. I've spent part of those 5 years doing X-Men sitting with Stan and watching him get mad.
Yes.
And that was because in Hollywood, for some reason, 15 people have to come for a meeting, big time executives, whatever. They think that people tend to drift in and not worry about time. Stan hated to be kept waiting. He never was going to be late for a meeting. And so and I just had some anxiety about it. I never want to be late for a meeting anyway, so inevitably, 10 minutes before the meeting started, Stan and I would be sitting there, and then he just kind of look at his watch, and then Stan and Jimmy, you know, would be pacing around, and, oh, they're going to be 10 minutes late again, what did they think? So that was my introduction to Stan, was watching him get frustrated before meetings, and then watching him let that out during the meeting.
Thank you. And now, waiting so patiently, it's Mike Kelly. Mike, I took this is, you can find this online. Mike didn't send me a photo, but I snuck a screen capture from Stan with a little background singing from Mike, singing Cocktails for Two. You can find it on YouTube. It's worth the search. But there is Mike, I guess, demonstrating the tube in the cocktails in the title. So tell us about your relationship with Stan.
It was, I think Brian said it best, always fantastic, always surreal. Whenever we did signings, he would get bored very quickly because it's repetitive, so he'd start singing songs, Irish songs, little tunes and ditties. And I would encourage him because it would keep him awake and alert as he went through hundreds of signatures, and that's so draining. So this is one of the cases where he was singing to me between some signings. And he had no shame about singing in public. He told me a story that at DeWitt Clinton, he was part of the Glee Club, and as far as he remembers, he's the only person who was actually rejected from the Glee Club and not allowed to sing. And I think it wasn't because his voice was funny. I think it's because his enthusiasm and his way to do it his own way was probably why the Glee Club said, Stan's, we don't need your services. But he loved to sing. He gave him a lot of energy, got him through a lot of long signings.
And you worked on a bunch of projects. I think this Silver Surfer script is not from this, but I couldn't figure out what comic it's from.
I came across this just recently. Now, this might be from another comic that he did earlier, but for some reason we scanned this page, and Stan shows in one page description what a great writer he was, and how he's able to do a deep homage to comics in just 5 panels using the Silver Surfer. It's a wonderful example of how pithy and how controlled his writing was, yet so illuminating. I think it's a great example. And his favorite character, one of his favorite characters to write was, of course, Silver Surfer.
And you worked on some of the Spider-Man strip with him?
His ongoing thing after Marvel, he and John Romita created the Spider-Man newspaper strip in 77 or 78, and he kept with it the rest of his life. Towards the end, Roy Thomas came and started writing the scripts, but Stan still kept his finger on it.
And Larry drew it for 35 years.
In fact, how it would work is, first it was Stan would give me the scripts, and I would send them out for the editors to produce. Alex Saturday later on for most of the years of Sundays and Larry for the dailies. And what Stan would do is when the dailies came back, pencil form, fax, because that's what we used, fax, he would get on the phone with Larry and go through each panel and essentially rewrite it to make it even more topical and punchy and move the 3-panel dialogue along very quickly. So he kept his finger on the pulse of the strip for a long time, and I got to work with some great people like Larry, Alex Saturday, Joe Sinnott, and a lot of other great ones. So that was a great privilege.
Incredible. And you worked with him for 25 years?
I worked for Stan for 24 years. I sort of became his exclusive assistant around 1998, but before that I was one of the team assistants, and in the same office working with John Semper. And I think Eric visited us a couple times. I certainly remember Larry coming by when we got the storyboards for the X-Men and for the Spider-Man animated. It was, I got to work with him every day. That's a privilege I guess no one else has. I don't know about the 3 personalities, it's a good theory, but I always sort of thought it was the same personality. Why he was J. Jonah Jameson is because he was a perfectionist. He wanted the very best result. And as a writer and as a art editor. He wanted always to be the very best. And it's the only time he would get a little above, I don't know, shouty, but not really. He was just trying to get the best performance out of the artist and out of the work. So, but yeah, it was generally Peter Parker to me. So, and something to Spider-Man. I guess the singing. I don't know if that'd be Spider-Man or Peter Parker. And finally, what he really do is, what he was really good at is whenever he meet people, as Brian's story tells you, within a minute he'd have that person laughing. He used humor to bring everybody down. Some people were, oh my God, stay down. Other people like big Hollywood people, like, I want you to make money for me and so on. But within the first minute of talking with him, everybody laughing, everybody relaxed, and therefore he could start being creative. That was one of his great gifts. The sense of humor, and able to bring humor to everything he did. And his favorite thing to write was humor, of course.
Thanks, Mike.
Danny, can I point out one thing about the complications of doing a Sunday spreader? Because some newspapers would only run the lower two lines. So you have to figure that you have a top strip that is not going to run in all editions. There was also a reconfiguration of pages, of panels, depending on the format in which it was printed. So tabloid newspapers would drop the second panel or the third panel in that second row to give you, so you had to figure out what panels you could lose and still not be repetitive and still make it exciting. So it is a real art form that a lot of people don't realize the complications about.
And of course, both Alex and Larry were masters of doing those panel forms. That's a very different format than the page-to-page comic.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly, this is a comic I edited that Stan wrote and scripted. It was the first time he scripted Spider-Man comics for years, and it was just surreal for me to edit that, and an honor, and weird, and Richard Treat is a peer by Stan. This is me and Stan at one of the many panels we did at the old Wizard World show, and again, it was a great honor to be chosen to be one of his regular moderators. This is a book, Marvelous Life, the story of Stan Lee. Contrary to how I sound today, I did the audiobook, which people seem to like. I also did the audiobook of two more of my books, which you can find. This is, of course, how a lot of people remember Stan, is from the cameos that he did. And that is the end of that part. I want to try to get to John before they chase us out here. So, you guys talk about yourselves, I'll try to make this work.
Yeah, it starts with some music, Andy, too, so you'll have time to set the volume and all that kind of stuff.
Well, actually, I want to say, his book on Stan is very good.
It's great.
And I've read, I think, all the books that there are on it, and I found yours to be the most illuminating. And while we were talking about the Peter Parker and J. Jonah aspect of it, it was in his book where I realized, oh, Stan was in publishing at 16 in New York City, where he shouldn't be. He should be home, right? But instead he was being lorded over by his uncle and in places. And obviously the story of Peter Parker.
There is too much talk with the kingpin and all the crime people. It needs action, and we've got to make the kingpin more powerful. Maybe he defies them physically. Maybe they want to put him in the jail because they don't want him, and he tears them in the apart. And you see his strength. This is all, it's too civilized. Page 10. Kingpin instructs the city six to adopt our narrative. He said, why should we take orders from everyone? See, there's too much talk. The kingpin convinces them. Why should we trust him? I give my word. It's too civilized. Let the kingpin prove evenly. You think, I'm just your average fat man, do you? Give me one of your tentacles. Ow! He crushes it, bless him. Here's a chance to get some color and some action and show what the kingpin really. This is like we're doing a Royal English drama or Lawrence Olivier talking to Michael Caine or something. Kingpin books to walk over the phone, they explained it to me. They have even waited to give Kingpin the honor of unmasking the wolf caller. Now, Mr. Semper, again, these are very loyal, wonderful guys. And it's like Stan and John Semper going to a meeting, and I feel you wrote the outline, so you should have the honor of reading the copy. They waited to give him the honor. They're not that nice. Maybe the Kingpin said, I'll offer $1 million to the first man who lets me unmask that. You know what I mean? It's gotta be, they're not giving him the honor. These are bastards. Every one of them, maybe they want to unmask him. Wait a minute, don't you remember the Kingpin said he'd give us $1 million if he could be the first one? Well, he won't know we unmasked him. No, for all we know, he's got peepholes. So don't take a chance. I can use that million. I mean, that's the way they're gonna. We'll give you the honor.
Well, I'll tell you where this came from.
Yeah.
Originally, there was no talk of unmasking him at all, which always drives me crazy, because that's the first thing you do if you're carrying an inspector. So that's how that got put in there. But let me ask you this. Haven't we established Doc Ock as being a slightly more highbrow character?
He said, well, we don't want them acting highbrow here. What you can do is, if he hides out in Spider-Man's house, he can be very gentlemanly to Aunt May. And he, but when these crooks are talking to each other, and it isn't the point of this outline to show them being highbrow. The point of this outline is to show 6 of the deadliest villains. The Kingpin is trying to control them. It should be difficult as hell to control them. They should be like a time bomb waiting to go off. Even if Doc Ock is educated, even if one of them is, that's not the way to run his dialogue. He wouldn't say D's and don'ts, but he's still got to be portrayed as a dangerous, unpredictable guy. You know? He doesn't hang the stolen Picasso on the walls, and the other guys did enjoy it.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, everybody. Happy birthday, Stan.